You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Have you ever stood in a grocery store watching prices climb and wondered how families are supposed to keep up? For many parents, the question isn't whether to buy organic, it's whether to buy dinner at all. Now, imagine if no child ever had to skip a meal again, not because their caregivers stretched $1, but because we stretched our priorities. You are listening to One Bite is Everything, where we examine the food from our plates and trace its meaning through producers and policies and take a look at how it meets the people. My name is Dana DiPrima, and I am your host. Today on One Bite is Everything, we are diving into a question that strikes at the core of who we are. What would it take to end child hunger in America? Not someday, but right now. I know there's not one person listening who thinks it's okay for a child to go hungry. To help us unpack that, we're joined by Rachel Sabella, director of No Kid Hungry New York, an advocate who's spent over a decade fighting to ensure that children and families have access to the meals they need. In this episode, you'll hear why hunger often hides in plain sight, even in homes that seem stable. How bipartisan policies like no-cost school meals and Summer EBT can change lives. And the unseen ripple effects of cutting federal nutrition programs, not just on families, but on farmers and local economies. And there's a powerful connection we'll explore between food dignity and national security that might shift the way you see what's on your plate. So, if you're ready to unpack some thinking about our food and how it relates to our communities and our next generation, kids who are kids now, but will be grown up soon, stick with me for this compelling episode of One Bite is Everything.
So we are facing a hunger crisis in this country. At No Kid Hungry, our work is really focused on connecting kids and families with meals. 1 in 5 children could face hunger this year. And one of the questions I get a lot is, what does it mean to be hungry? Does it mean somebody hasn't eaten for a week? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that. And when we say somebody could face food insecurity, it means a lot of things. It means somebody could be skipping a meal. It means a caregiver is cutting their portion or not having a meal to make sure a child is eating in their household. The other thing we talk about with the issue of hunger is that hunger hides in plain sight. And I often hear, but they live in a house. How could they be hungry? Well, they're paying for that house. They're paying for that electricity bill. They're paying for that transportation, which is so hard. I know as I look at my electric bill these days, it's like, how did this get so high? And so as people are making choices, what they can move in their budget is that food issue. So they are facing such challenges. And as we have this economic crisis and grocery prices rising, we hear from more and more families how hard it is to put healthy meals on the table.
Food insecurity in the United States is a complex and persistent issue driven by a mix of economic, social, and systemic factors. Nearly 40 million Americans live below the poverty line, with wages for many low-income workers remaining stagnant while housing and healthcare costs soar. As a result, millions struggle to afford enough food for themselves and their families. In addition to financial hardship, around 19 million people live in food deserts, areas where access to affordable and nutritious food is limited or non-existent. This forces many to rely on convenience stores offering highly processed, unhealthy options. Government assistance programs like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, provide some relief, but with an average monthly benefit of just $1.40 per person per meal. Many families find it insufficient to meet their needs. Marginalized communities, including immigrants and people of color, face even higher rates of food insecurity, often due to systemic barriers and limited access to benefits. The problem is further compounded by disruptions like the COVID-19 pandemic, which pushed millions more into poverty and strained the already fragile food systems. Give me a snapshot of who it is that's hungry across the country. I know you guys are focused on getting to kids, but what does the cross-section of the population look like?
Cross-section of the population is hunger hits everyone. It doesn't matter your ethnic background. It doesn't matter of your zip code. It hits children. It hits seniors. It is a crisis that is felt across the spectrum. And it's one we constantly hear from people that they want to see change happen. This is something that we hear all the time, whether it's the polls we do in New York, whether it's in other states. People want to see this as a bipartisan issue. This is a moral issue, and they want to see more done to connect kids and families with meals.
So is this mostly kids whose families are living under the poverty line, or is it a higher bar than the poverty line?
It is a higher bar than the poverty line these days. We know that the crisis is especially hard for families with lower incomes, but we also know that families are struggling with rising prices. We did a poll with No Kid Hungry about 2 months ago and asked New Yorkers about the rising grocery prices and what it meant. 86% of respondents across the state. So we had New York City, we had Suffolk County, we had rural communities. And what they said to us was their incomes were not keeping up with rising grocery prices. This was the same number as last year, but what was surprising to us this year is more than half the people also said that they were going into debt to pay for groceries. So not only are they cutting back and buying cheaper food, they're putting it on credit cards. We had one father that told us in this survey he had to take money out of his 401k in order to be able to feed his family. So even for middle income families, these rising prices are really impacting their ability to support their families right now.
Now, I know that the cost of groceries has been sort of a political ping pong ball, and I'm curious what kind of data you have about what's happening with grocery prices.
I can't necessarily speak to data right now, but what I can speak to is the anecdotes. And it's the constant messaging that we hear from families. Egg prices are still very high. We hear from families that when they go to the grocery store, they are literally standing at the register and have to choose between, the fresh fruits and vegetables and the proteins versus the canned goods or the prepackaged goods, more of the filler foods. And they're putting back those healthier options in order to stretch their budget as far as they can. We know that's going to have long-term health impacts. I had one person say to me, and I've not forgotten this phrase, that they went to purchase raspberries and they were shocked. And they said, "Isn't a diamond cheaper than raspberries?" And we laughed at that. But really, when you look at those prices, and I see it in the grocery store when I go there, I see people with their cards, especially seniors, and they are looking at what options do they have here, and they're making those cheaper options in order to have food on the table.
When you say it's our moral obligation to make sure that people who are hungry have food, I'm just curious because you sit in this space so intensely, sort of where that kind of moral obligation came from, or if it's woven into the fabric of our country in some way that you can pinpoint.
I think in a lot of ways, it's woven into the fabric of our country. And, I've worked in the anti-hunger community for more than 10 years. I had worked at a food bank, now working with No Kid Hungry. And this is an issue that when you go into offices, when you meet with elected officials, when you talk to reporters or talk to community members, everyone says the same thing: I want to help. I think the issue is how they want to help can be different, and who is looking at providing food versus funding. And it's always been something in my past experience where we've had bipartisan support and we've seen the value from so many different stakeholders. And I laugh sometimes, friends working on different issues in government. And one recently said to me, I don't know why people don't support the work that you do. It's like in some ways you shouldn't even have a job, especially if child hunger. We should not be in this debate. We should be making sure that every child has regular access to meals. And we have a lot of work to do right now.
Now, you said that people agree we should make sure that people are not hungry, but they don't always agree on how to help. Can you elaborate on that?
I think what I have seen is just there's been different solutions proposed. I think, we've seen from different stakeholders who is looking at it in terms of let's increase SNAP benefits so people can have dignity and choice and purchase options. I look at what the expanded child tax credit did during the pandemic for families across the country. That helped them. We heard directly from families that helped them to put food on the table. But then we also see sometimes it is we should be providing meals. So sometimes there's a different idea on how to get there, but whether it's from the average New Yorker that responds to our surveys, whether it's talking to different stakeholders, the consensus is we need to end child hunger.
And what role are food banks playing in this sort of equation?
Food banks play a key role in this work, whether they are providing meals, food options to whether it's emergency food providers. Sometimes they're putting school pantries in schools to make it easier for families to access. I think food banks have also done a tremendous job of working with local producers and how are they getting food from farmers in their area, or I think about in New York, how are they supporting different local options? We often say in the anti-hunger community that SNAP is the first line of defense against hunger, and emergency food is that last line. And so right now, especially as people are struggling more, they are looking at those food banks, they're looking at those food pantries. We saw throughout the pandemic the lines. I think that was on the media across the country. And we're hearing from more and more partners in the emergency food space, they are running out of food. Or as programs are being cut at the federal level, they are getting less food than they were contracted to do. And that's having a real impact on the communities they serve.
I spoke with a farmer who told me about, sort of the inside scoop on the local food purchase assistance program and how that's been cut.
Yeah.
Does that reach your organization? Is there an impact there?
That impact, what the cuts are doing to those local food programs is devastating. We are seeing it. It impacted school districts across the country who were in the process of spending down those grants and then had the funds canceled in the middle of the year. I think about our partners in New York State. We think about Long Island in Nassau and Suffolk counties. The two food banks in the area lost about $2.6 million that they were spending with local farmers. And what that impact was going to have not only on families that they had hoped to serve, but also on that farmer who put that time and energy in, who thought that funding was coming. We're also facing an issue like that in Western New York, where the Providence Farm Collective lost $750,000 from USDA that was for training for immigrant and refugee farmers. That was going for 100,000 pounds of food they provide each year. So you look at that impact. Someone said to me recently, food security is farm security and small business security. These all come hand in hand. And when we are putting dollars into these anti-hunger programs and in allowing organizations to purchase locally grown food, it's supporting the economy. It's money that's going to those local businesses. It's keeping people employed. It's also giving families and kids access to that local, healthy food. I love when I go into a school and something in New York they call is New York Thursdays. And what is the New York Thursday product they've had? So there's a lot of apples and yogurts and things that were grown here. And it gives the kids so much pride to be able to know that came from the same state as them. So this is a cut that's devastating, and it's one we hope is going to be restored because it is impacting families, the economy, and so many people in so many different ways.
You talk about pride, and I guess I think sometimes about some of these programs, the stigma that comes with SNAP benefits, which I know you're able to use in a little bit more discreetly, but obviously emergency food and having to go to a food pantry. I'm just curious about, the folks who are not accessing food maybe because of those reasons, or what factor that element of dignity plays with what kind of work that you're doing.
I appreciate the question because the issue of dignity is at the heart of everything that we do. And I think about, let's look at the work No Kid Hungry does. We have fought to make school meals more accessible. So some of our work about breakfast after the bell, breakfast in the classroom, we heard from kids for a long time. They didn't want to come in early because somebody was watching them and they felt different. And when we have programs like this, when we have programs that provide no cost school meals to every child, nobody knows the difference. And I talked to a food service director once, and her child was in the same school district she was working in. And it was the first year they did no cost school meals for everyone. And she's like, my child will not know a world that is any different, that everybody is treated the same. And I think about that so much because kids carry that. The amount of successful individuals that I've talked to as adults who have said to me, people called me free. And I did not get that free meal because I didn't want to be made fun of. And to see this work to provide that dignity is so important. I think that's one of the reasons we advocate so hard for SNAP benefits. And over the last 2 years, the federal government launched another grocery benefit program called Summer EBT that provided grocery benefits to eligible families in the summer months. And it's all on a card, just like it looks like a credit card.
The Summer Electronic Benefit Transfer, or Summer EBT program, launched in 2022, provides $120 per eligible child to purchase groceries during the summer months when school meal programs are unavailable. This initiative aims to address child hunger by offering families additional resources with benefits distributed through an EBT card that can be used at participating stores and farmers markets. The program is available in 37 states, Washington, D.C., U.S. territories, and 5 tribal nations, and eligibility is generally extended to children who participate in free or reduced-priced school meals whose households receive benefits like SNAP or Medicaid. Research indicates that Summer EBT helps reduce food insecurity and improves nutrition among children during the summer. Not all states participate. For example, Tennessee has opted out, leaving some children without this additional support. Despite these gaps, Summer EBT remains an essential resource for families in need, helping to fill the food security gap during the summer months.
A few years ago, New York redesigned our cards to be blue color, sort of look like a Chase card. So it helped people not to feel any different when they took that out. It lets them choose the food that they want. That is what their family wants to have, and doesn't say, you are struggling, we're going to tell you exactly what to eat. No, you are an individual that has choice, that should have those opportunities to pick the food that is for their families, to also go to the businesses that they want to. SNAP benefits, Summer EBT benefits, they can be used at green markets. They can go to farmers markets and get those healthy foods. So, and that's what we hear from families all the time. They're like, I want to get my children that produce and that support. So when we have these programs, and that's at the core of what we do at No Kid Hungry, it is giving that dignity to families.
Can you explain for me the no cost? Is that, what did you call it? The no cost food at school?
No cost school meals. So actually, New York was just the 9th state to enact a provision that every child in the state would have no cost school meals. So a no cost breakfast and a no cost lunch. I don't say the word free because the costs are being absorbed someplace else. So to families, there are no costs. So we just try to be a little careful with the language, but they are leveraging programs, whether it is coming from the federal government, they're putting state dollars in because they're recognizing how critical this is. And it's also what we see in those states. It's what we just talked about. It's bringing back that dignity. It's taking away that stigma. Something I think was really interesting in this current year is 2 governors had proposed free school breakfast for everyone, no cost school breakfast, every child in their state, and opted into summer EBT. One was New York Governor Kathy Hochul. The other one was Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, from 2 different political parties, but both saw the value in this and knew how much families in their states needed it. So we're seeing that movement. In New York, they're saying that this will save families on average $168 per month. And so that's money that they are spending on increased rent, or they're going to be putting towards other bills, and they're able to know that their child is going to get that healthy meal when they go to school. So it's something we're really excited about, and we'll see starting in September.
Right. So then your child eating, it's not a bargaining chip in your day about what you can afford. So this is like really a guarantee that everybody's eating.
Yes. And, with the expansion of summer meal programs, they're also getting those when school is out of session too. And we're seeing that across the country, and a real recognition of what this can do and how it's helping families these days. These choices that people have to make these are impossible choices. And we should be, and we can be doing a lot more to make it easier for them to put nutritious food on the table.
Let's talk a little bit about legislation. I guess there's 2 ways to look at this right now. There's what's going on the federal stage, and then what's sort of being pushed down, as you were describing, to the state level. Can you talk to both of those?
One of the things we're seeing in states is that elected officials are coming together in both parties and looking at how can we address these issues? How are we helping families to put food on the table? So, when I reference New York doing the free school meals for all, the no-cost school meals, these were bipartisan priorities. More than half of New York State Assembly Republicans had signed on to this. We did a school breakfast day ceremony in Albany, and it was a wonderful day in the state capitol. And when we were on the state Senate floor, we heard from Democrats and Republicans. There was no partisan words in anything that they said, but they were coming together to do this. So we're seeing states move in this direction. Other states have been considering the universal school meals. States are looking at how do they opt into the summer EBT program, which does make that, while those are federal funding, what the states do have to put up is 50% of the administrative costs. And we're seeing it from states with governors that are both from Democratic states and Republican states that are opting in. Louisiana has done a great job with the program. So we're seeing that. What we need to see changed at the federal level is people coming together from both sides of the aisle, because that bipartisanship seems to be missing in Congress right now. And, I'm sure what your listeners have heard, people are reading about, is the House majority on the Agriculture Committee are looking to cut $230 billion from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So whether it is cuts to SNAP, it is more cuts to farmers, or those programs that are providing food, emergency food, to food banks, food pantries, and soup kitchens.
The U.S. House of Representatives has advanced a proposal to cut approximately $230 billion from the Department of Agriculture's programs over the next decade, primarily targeting the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. This reduction, part of a broader budget reconciliation bill, would cut federal spending on SNAP by 20% and shift financial responsibility to states. While this approach could lead to stricter eligibility requirements and reduced benefits for millions of low-income Americans, it also poses several risks. States with varying resources and political priorities could create a patchwork of services, increasing inequality and confusion for recipients. Stricter state level eligibility criteria might exclude vulnerable groups like working families, children, and the elderly, exacerbating food insecurity. What's more is states may reduce benefit amounts or program duration, further limiting support. The administrative burden on states could also lead to inefficiencies, delays, and disruptions in benefits. Political influences could result in policies favoring some populations over others, and state-based programs may struggle to respond to national crises or disasters. Shifting responsibility to states could make the food assistance system less cohesive, equitable, and effective in addressing hunger.
What we're seeing could have a devastating impact. And again, it's not what the majority of this country wants to see. They want to see hunger addressed. And we need our federal elected officials to come together and to work towards connecting those in need with meals.
So I've heard about this too, these billions of dollars that would be cut from the USDA, mainly from SNAP over the next 10 years. Is the idea that they think it would be then pushed down to state responsibilities? Is that what they're looking at?
They are looking at everything. And what we've seen in a bill that was recently introduced was they could cut future SNAP benefits, estimated at $36 billion nationally over a period of time. So not immediately, but it's still going to have that long-term impact. There's also places where they are saying they want to push costs to the states. States haven't been prepared for that. When we look at analysis in New York alone, it could be $2 billion that the state would have to find, whether it's for operations or other elements of the program. I think one of the things we're also seeing, which is deeply concerning to me, is with USDA and really across the federal government as they are reducing the workforce, because those are the staff members that are doing the compliance, that are making sure the fraud is not there, that people are following the rules. And when the workforce isn't there, how are these programs going to run? So there are so many ways these cuts are dangerous. Again, it's also then putting people out of work, having them face this economic crisis differently. And, time and time again, it was these programs in the US Department of Agriculture that were done not only to help people, but to help the economy. So these are, again, there's so many reasons to support it. There's so many wins. And so we are deeply, deeply concerned about these programs and potential cuts, and have joined with partners and voices across the country to share our opposition to it.
I really appreciate your point in terms of all of the folks from the federal government who are being let go. And, my first job out of college was in the feds. The people that I worked with, that's what they had done their entire career. So where are they going when they're still really supporting a family at, 45 to 55?
And I think those individuals, we think about the federal workforce, for so many of them as career employees, they know these programs inside and out. It's not politics for them. It's about making these programs run and run well. And to lose that expertise, to lose that support, we're going to have even further negative impacts. And I'm devastated by what this shows, but I am also choosing to be hopeful that as we continue to dialogue, as we continue to share these updates, people are going to come together and see, you cut SNAP, you're impacting your farmers, you're impacting your local grocery stores, you're also impacting your big business that has benefited from this. The biggest part is you are impacting those that need access to food. But I keep going back to, these are not, there are so many ways these cuts are impacting our society, and how by putting funding and putting resources and attention on these programs.
So what can people do? Obviously, calling representatives is certainly one way on the state level and the federal level, but I'm just thinking about on the ground, like how can people be helpful and make sure that, that we're supporting our kids? And we haven't even really talked about seniors, but supporting the folks who are in need of that kind of support.
No Kid Hungry is a campaign of share our strength. And we often say everybody has a strength to share. And it doesn't matter your income level, it doesn't matter where you live in the country. You have something you can share as we work to end hunger. So, number one, we want people to raise their voice and draw attention to this issue, whether it's calling your local elected officials, whether it's talking about it with other people in your community to say, do you realize this is an issue? This is something that we need to pay attention to. People can also volunteer. There are so many emergency food programs that are volunteer run, and whether it is helping to support their operations, whether it is donating their time, their treasure, it's supporting food drives in their areas. The other thing that I always really encourage people to do is to help us get the word out about these programs, especially when it comes to summer meals. This is something that we talk about across the country. There are billboards no matter where you are, notices in grocery stores, school districts pass out information, but we still have to hear from families that they don't know about this program. So I often say, can you share this on your social media? I also spend a lot of time, it sounds silly, but in my local Facebook group for my neighborhood, answering questions when people say, hey, where do I get a summer EBT card? Or my neighbor is having a hard time. Do you know where they can pick up a meal? Yes, I can put information in that Facebook group, make it very easy. And I also hope by doing that, we're letting people know it is okay to use these programs. Don't think about that stigma, but think about these are out there. So I also believe anything your listeners, the community at large can do to remove that stigma, to make sure the kids are eating those meals in schools so everyone is the same and no one knows the difference, that is going to really help us in this work.
Where do you find a summer EBT card?
So depending on your state for Summer EBT, sometimes it is going on an existing card. In some states, it is going on a card that's in the mail, but it's all administered by the state agency. And I think there's a lot of misinformation. I have seen everything from, oh no, your school can print out a new card for you. No, your school can't do that. Can you go to a local county office? So we always say, go to your state SNAP agency. They will have that information on their website, tell you how to do that. They'll also have the additional resources about where can you go to apply for SNAP. We hear from a lot of people that say, well, I have a job. I'm not eligible for SNAP. That's not true. It's all about your income level. So, being able to either talk to a community organization or some of the groups we work with have online calculators. So someone can do a preliminary check to see if they might be eligible. So again, pushing that information out, trying to clear up any misunderstandings or myths out there. Those are really things that can be so helpful in this. So when I say raise your voice, I mean it in so many different ways, but we want people to speak out about this.
What am I missing? I'm sure there's something I haven't covered.
If I could just talk a little bit about Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry, some of that background. Yep. So Share Our Strength is a national organization working to end childhood hunger and poverty. And our No Kid Hungry campaign is on the ground, is working with community organizations and with partners to connect more kids and families with meals. And whether it's through grants, through advocacy, through helping school districts to understand this is what a farm to school program can do for you. Apply for this. Get that healthy food, that locally grown food. So really helping to connect the dots, to remove barriers, and to make sure that families are accessing the benefits that they're eligible for.
Just a follow-up question to something before, in terms of federal programs shrinking and putting pressure on states to pick up the slack. I've also heard that the private sector will fill this void. So philanthropists and charitable organizations, maybe churches. I'm just wondering about the nut, right? Like, if we're going to shrink one nut by a certain large percentage, will we be able to pick it up, or we're just going to, continue to have a hole?
I think we're going to continue to have a hole. If these cuts were to be realized, $230 billion. that is not something that I know anyone that can write that check right away to fix that. And I think about, you mentioned the faith-based community, whether it's the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, they are on the front lines. So many of their programs are also volunteer run. They rely on these federal programs to provide that food to them, and also that culturally appropriate food, whether it's kosher certified, halal or certified. And to now have these cuts be coming, they're going to do everything they can. And I know that, members of congregations and community members are going to donate food. That is not going to be enough to fill these holes. And if we're looking at people are going to lose, their SNAP benefits, that's money that they're not going to have. That these pantries are not getting a difference in, that food to fill. I also worry with these SNAP benefits cuts. Again, that's money they're not spending in the local grocery store, the bodega. They're not going to the farmers markets to purchase anymore. So this impact is far reaching, and we need to make sure that it does not become a reality, because I think it could have a devastation that we've not quite seen before.
I'm curious how you all are dealing with the shift in rhetoric around the programs and the folks who are receiving benefits. In the last few months, it's really heated up in terms of you shouldn't have help. You should be able to buy your own groceries. This is, our capitalist society, and we can't be supporting you. I'm just curious how you all are dealing with that kind of rhetoric.
What I think about with rhetoric like that on a personal level, I don't believe it. It's not something we do. But professionally, if you go out there and you're, in communities and talking to families, they want to be working. They want to be providing their children, their elderly family members that are living with them with the food and resources. Sometimes people need support, and that's why these government programs exist. So part of my job is to make sure that the real narrative is out there, and to make sure we're uplifting voices and making sure people understand what is at stake. Who are the faces of this? I think about seniors who have been priced out of some of the communities that they have lived in for 75 plus years, and they're renting rooms because this is where they want to stay. And what that SNAP benefit does, or what that emergency food program where they get that free meal goes for them. And how are we as a country, if that's what we're going to be cutting? We've got to do better, and we have to look at all members of our society and give them these tools. But, that's why I'm so grateful for the chance to talk to you today. As we get the word out, as we talk to others, this is how we change the narrative. And we talk about these are working families. These are people that are working so hard to provide meals to kids. And how can we use this structure, our schools, our community organizations, to give them the tools they need right now?
In all of the states across the U.S., we have urban centers and we have rural communities. I'm interested to understand a little bit what the personalities are of these communities in terms of programs like yours.
I think it's so interesting when we think about that, because in some cases, there are a lot of differences from rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas about accessing programs or how it goes. Ultimately, there are people struggling with hunger in each one of those communities. In the pandemic, we were able to try some programs that many of us had advocated for a long time. So one of the things that we'd really worked on was in the summer months when kids could pick up meals at schools, the way the program had been structured is you had to eat it on site with somebody watching. Now, that meant somebody had to take you to that program every day. Again, couldn't take it home. If you were sick and couldn't get there, that maybe meant you couldn't get a meal. And in the pandemic, they did that you could do these non-congregate meals. You didn't have to be in that congregate setting, and parent or caregiver could pick up meals. They could take multiple days worth of meals at home, and also have that flexibility on time, because if a school was only open for 2 hours and you were at work, you couldn't get that meal. So since we've come out of that time, the federal government has made part of that program permanent. So in rural areas, they do have an option to do these non-congregate programs. And I was visiting a program, and what they were telling me was in this particular area, school district covered 3 counties. And there was 2 families that didn't always have daily car access. They were sort of in the same area, but both were very far from the program. So they would take turns. Who would pick up a few days worth of meals? Who could get there that week to make sure both families had those meals? So we're seeing how important this is in rural areas. I also went on a ride with one of the programs, and we were driving into different homes. We would drive for 20 minutes, see one home, drive another 20 minutes and see another home. So really trying to support that there. Ultimately, we'd love to see programs like this everywhere, and the hope is we'll see this expanded. I think about in urban areas, whether it is children that may not have a summer camp and they're in an apartment building all day, but could they have a couple of meals, where that goes, or a parent walking home from the subway and picking up those meals. So we're seeing different solutions, but we also know there are schools in all these communities. It's why we need these healthy school meals. There are the grocery stores for the SNAP benefits, for the Summer EBT programs, but how can we continue to innovate and look at what works in those areas? We've also supported some programs with vans to be able to drive meals around to get there, or we had some schools that actually needed support for cold weather gear when they were outside and trying to feed kids. So again, trying to help find those solutions, but ultimately, we know the programs that work, and what we want to do is make sure every school, every community, every zip code is implementing it to the way that works best for them.
This obviously isn't a job for you. You're really very invested in this. How long have you been doing this, and how did you get started?
If you can't hear it in my accent, I am a New Yorker, born and raised. So this work is very, very personal for me. These are the communities where my family lives, where I grew up, and I want to make sure every child has those resources. I had spent a lot of my career working in youth development programs and education, and then I was offered an opportunity to join the Food Bank for New York City, led their government relations efforts, and really learned and helped to understand how important these programs are. And, my mom said to me one day, this has become a mission for you. And then I had the opportunity to come to Share Strength to really establish the No Kid Hungry campaign in New York State. So to take the work I had done in education, to take this mission and passion on the hunger issues, put it together, and in a community that I love so much, I always say it is truly an honor and privilege to do this work, to speak up for families, to make sure that they have the tools they need, and, to work in an organization with my colleagues that have been doing this for so long, and just so many of our partners, whether it's, corporations that are standing up, whether it's the culinary community, chefs are so passionate about this work. I will also get emails from kids. They're like, I want to do something. And whether it's a lemonade stand or they want to do an advocacy campaign, what people do continues to inspire me each and every day. And I think continues to fuel the work that I do, that my colleagues are doing, that our partner organizations are doing. But this is real for me. I hope someday I am out of a job and we don't have to talk about child hunger. But for now, I am here. I am in the fight. The feisty New Yorker is out there and not going to give up.
I am honored that Rachel Sabella of No Kid Hungry New York could join us today. I think you are too. She reminded us that hunger doesn't look the way most people imagine, and that it affects far more than just empty stomachs. It affects how kids learn, how families thrive, and how our communities grow. As you think about what's on your plate at dinner tonight, consider who had the power to choose that meal and who didn't. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's a child across town. Maybe it's someone you'll never meet, but whose life could change with one policy, one phone call, or one shared voice. If this conversation moved you in any way, please leave a 5-star rating and a written review. It helps more listeners like you find their way to these critical stories. One Bite is Everything is co-produced by Sonia Dillon. Sound engineering and original music are by Russell Cheppa. Thank you to them for their excellence and their commitment to this show. Until next time, I am your host, Dana DiPrima, and I am so glad you were here with me today. I'll see you again next week.